Hi. Kansas, spring of 1875. The train had long gone, but Julia Martin stood frozen, her gloved fingers white against the edge of her suitcase. Ash Creek's tiny station buzzed with murmurs as townsfolk lingered, casting sideways glances at the woman who'd arrived 3 days ago and never left. At the ticket booth, she pleaded again, voice brittle. "You're lying. He was supposed to be here." The station master's eyes softened, but he shook his head. "Miss, we checked twice. No Henry Lowell on any manifest." Julia staggered back, wind catching the lace of her collar. Around her, whispers churned. "Another one?" someone muttered. "Third this spring." Her knees buckled onto the hard bench. She had waited 3 days in the cold, clutching a letter and a dream. But the name, the promise, everything was false. There was no Henry Lowell. And Julia Martin was alone in a town that hadn't asked her to come. Julia Martin had never been reckless. She had spent her life folding corners, stitching hems, and biting back her voice when it trembled with wanting more. St. Louis had offered no kindness, only the staleness of factory dust, the hunger of coal smoke, and a boarding house where walls were so thin, sorrow seeped through like damp. At 27, she knew the rhythm of tedium. Rise before dawn, lace corsets, so until her fingers bled. Eat alone, sleep cold, repeat. Then the letter came. It had arrived with her name written in a fine hand, as if someone had spoken it kindly for the first time. Inside, the words were plain but generous. "I saw your notice in the matrimonial paper. My name is Henry Lowell. I have a small homestead in Kansas. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. If you're willing to come west, I promise I'll be waiting." She had read it a dozen times before believing it, another dozen before replying. Within a month, she had sold her few belongings and bought a one-way ticket. Now she sat on a weathered bench beneath the soot-stained eaves of Ash Creek Station, a single valise at her feet. Her coat was thin, better suited for sewing rooms than prairie wind. The lace at her wrists had frayed. 3 nights she'd waited, sleeping upright, nibbling dry bread from her coat pocket, too proud to beg, too frightened to ask what would happen if he never came. Now she knew. Henry Lowell didn't exist. She crumpled the letter in her fist, its creases catching the wind and flaring like a dying ember. Across the platform, children watched her with quiet wonder, while men turned their collars and walked past quickly, as if her heartbreak were contagious. The townsfolk murmured. "Another mail-order bride duped," someone said. "Shame." Julia turned her face away. She'd heard whispers like that before. At the factory, when her father died and left her to work through grief. At the boarding house, when a man had tried to corner her by the stairs and she'd fought back. They always whispered, always turned away. But no one stayed. No one ever stayed. So she pulled her shawl tight, breathed against the cold, and reminded herself. She'd crossed 1,000 miles for something better, and she wasn't going back. The third morning came cold and gray, dust curling low across the tracks like smoke from a dying fire. Julia sat hunched on the station bench, her coat drawn tight, her lips chapped from the wind. She hadn't slept. The wooden slats of the bench pressed bruises into her spine. Her bread was gone, her coin purse nearly empty, and the town had begun to watch her differently. Not with curiosity, but with pity. She tried not to meet their eyes. In St. Louis, she'd known how to disappear. Blend in behind sewing tables, nod politely at landladies, keep her voice even no matter what the foreman shouted. But here in Ash Creek, she was something peculiar. A woman waiting for a ghost. She closed her eyes. Then a tug at her skirt. Her eyes snapped open, heart thudding. She looked down to see a boy, small, maybe 5 or 6 years old, skinny as a fence rail. His boots, much too large, flopped awkwardly as he stood. His coat was patched with mismatched fabric, fastened closed with a bit of twine. Dirt smudged his cheeks and a scab darkened one temple. "Are you the lady who waited at the station?" he asked. Julia blinked. "Pardon. You've been here 3 days," he said plainly. "I seen you. You waitin' for somebody." She hesitated. "I was." "Then will you marry my daddy?" Her mouth fell open. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The boy fished something from his coat pocket, a folded scrap of newspaper. He opened it carefully, smoothing it against his thigh. There, faded and creased, was the very advertisement Julia had placed months ago. Widowed seamstress, 27, seeks quiet life in Western Territory. Kindness over wealth, steadiness over charm, willing to travel. "That's me," she whispered. "Where did you get this?" "I took it from the post office," the boy said. "I saw your face and thought, she's the one. You thought I was—" "What?" He shrugged, as though it should be obvious. "You looked like you'd stay." The wind stirred her skirts. Behind them, a shopkeeper flipped his sign to open and gave them a curious glance. Julia's voice softened. "What's your name?" "Sammy. Sammy Carson. I'm 5.5. He held up 6 fingers, noticed, and corrected himself with a small frown. "We live past the river. Real far. We got cows and chickens and a dog that don't listen." "And your father?" Sammy shifted his weight. "He's real quiet. Been sad a long time. He didn't send no letter. I wrote it myself." Julia's brows lifted. "You wrote me?" He nodded, proud. "I found the envelope. I asked the postman to send it. He said it probably wouldn't work. But it did." Julia didn't know whether to laugh or weep. "So you brought me here under false pretenses." "I don't know that word," he said, squinting. "But Daddy needs someone. He just don't know how to ask." She stared at the boy, at his earnestness, at the cold red tips of his ears and the hopeful tilt of his chin. "And what if I say no?" Sammy's face fell, but he didn't argue. "Then I walk home alone. I'll try again later. But I hoped maybe you'd come now." The wind changed, bringing with it the scent of damp prairie and horse dung. Julia's limbs ached with fatigue, her chest hollowed by disappointment. She'd given up everything for a name. She had arrived in Ash Creek a believer. Now she was just a ghost of that hope. But here, in the middle of all that ruin, was a child. Alone. Brave. Trying. She looked past him toward the hills, low green and gray shapes blurred by morning fog. Somewhere out there, a man lived who hadn't asked for her, but who, perhaps, had needed something neither of them could name. "I'm not dressed for walking," she murmured. Sammy's face brightened. "We got a wagon by the orchard." "A wagon?" "Sorta. It rolls." She smiled despite herself. "That's not very reassuring." He took her gloved hand. His fingers were rough with calluses, though tiny. "I ain't scared of snakes," he said, trying to impress her. "Or frogs. Or the dark." "Are you scared of strangers?" she asked gently. Sammy shook his head. "You're not a stranger. I seen your picture." "Pictures lie." He shrugged. "So do grown-ups." Julia laughed. Not a big sound, but a real one. Ragged at the edges, surprising even to her own ears. The boy tugged her toward the road. "Come on, before Daddy wakes up. If he sees us first thing, maybe he won't send you away. And if he does?" Sammy's grip tightened. "Then I'll cry real loud and he'll feel bad." She paused, looked back once more at the station bench, the cold wood where her hope had withered, then at the boy. "I should be angry with you," she said. Sammy looked up. "Are you?" She thought about it. "No," she said quietly. "I think I'm grateful." Then Julia Martin picked up her suitcase, took Sammy Carson's hand again, and stepped off the platform into the unknown. The walk past the river took hours, longer than Julia expected. The road was little more than 2 wagon tracks threading between hills, sometimes disappearing altogether in patches of rock and clay. Her boots, too fine for such terrain, slipped in the mud more than once. Sammy didn't complain, though. He talked about everything. "We had a pig once, but he ran away. Daddy said he got tired of being bacon." Julia smiled faintly. "And we got chickens, but only 2 lay eggs. The others just stare at you like you're dumb." He skipped a rock into a creek they crossed and grinned. "You know how to shoot?" "No." "Good. Daddy'll like that. He says women with rifles are dangerous. I imagine he thinks women without them are helpless." Sammy frowned, confused by the words, but kept walking. It was late morning when they crested a low ridge and the house came into view. At the edge of the prairie, tucked against the hills, sat a tired-looking ranch, weather-worn and silent. The fence slouched in places. The barn leaned like an old man with a bad hip. A dog barked once, then slunk under the porch. Smoke curled from the chimney in a thin, uncertain thread. Sammy turned to her, eyes bright. "We're home." Julia took a breath. The house wasn't much, but it was standing. And it was more than what waited back at the station. "Is your father expecting you?" she asked. "Nope." He marched up the porch steps and opened the door without knocking. Julia stayed behind. A moment passed. Then a man stepped into the doorway. He filled it. Tall, broad, worn around the edges. His beard was patchy but trimmed. His shirt, though faded, was clean. His eyes were a stormy blue, shadowed by wariness and something older. Grief, maybe. He looked at Julia, then at Sammy. "What's this?" he asked. Sammy stood his ground. "This is the lady from the picture." Will's eyebrows twitched. "What picture?" "The one I sent. I took it from the post office." "You sent a letter?" "Aha. I said you needed a wife and I found one." The man's jaw tightened. He stepped onto the porch, arms crossed. Julia straightened. "Your son took it upon himself to write in your name. I didn't come to deceive." Will looked her over. "You came all this way?" "I did." "Why?" "Because I had nowhere else to go." Silence stretched. "You're welcome to rest," he said finally. "But I didn't send for you. I don't want a wife." "Then I'll leave after a meal." "Fine." He opened the door wider. "Sammy, go wash up." Julia followed him inside. The house was clean but sparse. A single room with a bed in one corner, a stove in another. A rifle hung over the hearth. The walls were lined with tools and ropes, the air faintly scented of wood smoke and oil. Will offered no seat. She didn't ask for one. He ladled out stew, placed it on the table, and stood back. She sat, ate in silence. Sammy joined her, chattering between mouthfuls. Will watched but said little. After the meal, she offered to clean. He declined. That night, she took the floor near the stove. Sammy insisted on giving her the quilt. She refused but relented when he fell asleep with it draped over her legs. The wind howled through the eaves. The dog growled once at something unseen. Julia closed her eyes. Then came the scream. "Sammy." Julia bolted upright. The boy thrashed under his blanket, his skin slick with sweat. Will rushed from the other side of the room. "What's wrong with him?" Julia was already at his side, hand on his forehead. "He's burning." Will hovered. "He was fine this morning." "Not anymore." She turned to him. "You have water?" "In the well." "I need rags. A basin. Now." He moved. She stripped the boy's shirt, bathed his face, pressed cool cloth to his chest. Sammy whimpered, delirious. His fingers clutched at nothing. "He's shivering," Will said. "But he's hot. It's a fever." "From what?" "Could be anything. Something he ate. The cold. Infection." She wiped Sammy's brow again. "This isn't new to me. I helped raise my sister's twins. They caught fevers every winter." Will stood by helplessly, hands clenched. "I should have noticed sooner," he muttered. Julia didn't respond. She focused on the boy's breathing. Hours passed. The fire burned low. The sky lightened at the edges. Julia stayed at his side, never sleeping. Once Will brought more water. Another time, he covered her shoulders with his coat. Just before dawn, the fever broke. Sammy's eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, dazed, and smiled. "You didn't leave." She smoothed his damp hair. "Of course not." He drifted back to sleep. Will sat across the room, elbows on knees, watching her. "Thank you," he said quietly. Julia nodded. "I thought you were another mistake," he added. "Turns out maybe you're just what he needed." Julia didn't answer. She was too tired, too raw. But when she looked up, Will's expression had softened. The coldness was still there, but something beneath it had shifted. Not trust, not yet. But something like it. The first whisper came from behind the mercantile counter. She's still staying with him? She's still living in his house. Without a ring. Without a name. She came on a lie. And she stayed. The second whisper came from the church steps. I saw her buying nails. Like she plans to stay. Does she think that child is hers now? They say she nurses him through the fever like a wife. She's not his wife. The third whisper didn't hide behind anything. It came from a man in the saloon doorway, loud enough for Julia to hear as she passed by. Will Carson's got himself a pretty ghost, hasn't he? She kept walking. The townsfolk didn't need proof. They had glances. They had gossip. That was enough. In a place like Ash Creek, stories became fact before the second telling. And a woman without a man's name might as well be wearing a target. Julia tried to ignore it. She kept her head down. Helped Will mend the fence line. Sewed Sammy's sleeves when he tore them on Briar. Swept the porch. Fed the dog. Held her silence when Will came home quiet and didn't want to say where he'd been. But the whispers followed. She's the third mail-order bride who got fooled, someone told the barber. That's a pattern, ain't it? I heard Will never even placed an ad, another said. The boy did it. Made the whole thing up. Maybe she knew. Maybe she came anyway. Maybe she's after something. Maybe they're both lying. The weight of their judgment pressed on Julia more with each passing day. She bore it silently, as she always had, but it scraped something raw inside her. Will never spoke of the town. Not directly, but he noticed. She knew he noticed. One night, as she scraped ashes from the stove, she heard him murmur behind her, low and angry. They'd rather believe something ugly than something kind. She didn't reply, because she wasn't sure which one they were. The storm came sudden and without warning. One minute, the afternoon was warm and gold. The next, clouds rolled in from the west like a bruised wall. The wind howled. Chickens scattered. The dog whimpered and crawled under the porch. Will rushed to the barn, shouting over the thunder, trying to calm the horses before they kicked down their stalls. Julia grabbed Sammy's hand and brought him inside. Then smoke. She smelled it before she saw it. A bitter scent beneath the rain. Something unnatural. She ran to the window and froze. The barn. Glowing. Orange flames licking through the slats like tongues. Lightning hadn't struck. The storm hadn't even started yet. But the fire was already eating its way through the rafters. And inside screaming. The horses. Will! She cried. The barn. He was already running. No coat. No hat. Just a soaked shirt and rage in his eyes. Julia followed without thinking, shouting to Sammy to stay put. The wind slammed against her as she ran. Rain hit sideways. Smoke billowed. Sparks blew like ash from a funeral pyre. Will grabbed a shovel and began prying at the door. They're still in there. She grabbed the side entrance. Jammed. She braced her shoulder and threw herself against it. Once. Twice. Cracked open. Heat burst through like a living thing. Julia gagged on smoke, eyes burning. Inside, a horse kicked wildly at its stall, eyes rolling. Flames danced across the far beam. Get back, Will shouted. No, she coughed. Help me. She ran forward, yanked the gate, and smacked the animal's side with her sleeve. It bolted into the rain. Another stall, another gate, another frightened creature she guided out. One hand on its flank, one arm over her face. Will caught up to her. Together they worked side by side, barely visible through the smoke. One more horse, then two. Flames crackled overhead. The roof groaned. Now, Will shouted. We have to go. They stumbled out just as the roof gave way behind them. Fire roared up into the storm. They collapsed in the mud, coughing, soaking, shaking. The horses were free. The barn was gone. Half the town came the next morning. Some pretended to offer help. Others just watched. McCrae, a rancher with a tight mouth and tighter heart, walked the perimeter and muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Funny, he said. Lightning didn't strike anything else. Will didn't answer. Later, Julia found McCrae's name scrawled in the dirt near the barn ruins. Someone had written it with a boot heel. A message, maybe, or a threat. At midday, Reverend Gray came to call. He stood on the porch, eyes flicking over the smoldering remains in the field. I heard someone saw a rider heading west just after the blaze caught. Will didn't answer. They say you've been short on feed. That maybe you're looking to collect insurance. I've never filed a claim in my life. They also say McCrae lost 2 head last week. Will's gaze sharpened. I haven't stepped on his land. But you've crossed it, the Reverend said. With no proof you didn't take what he's missing. And what's Julia supposed to be in all this? Will asked. The lookout. The Reverend's eyes tightened. You should be careful. She saved every damn horse in that barn. She's not your wife, Will. Will stepped forward. She's more honest than half this town. The Reverend said nothing, just turned and walked away. That night, Will sat on the porch with a bottle and didn't come in for hours. Julia stayed with Sammy, who was quiet again, watching. You're not going to leave, are you? He asked. She brushed his hair back. Do you want me to? No, he paused. But people say bad things. They always do. She kissed his forehead. Close your eyes. Later, she joined Will on the porch. He handed her the bottle. She shook her head. I found something, he said. Nailed to the gate. He handed her a folded scrap of paper. She opened it. The words were written in slanted black ink. Go back where you came from. Or next time it won't be the barn. Julia read it twice. Then, without speaking, she tore it once, then again, then a third time. Let the pieces scatter in the wind. I've lost too much to be chased away by cowards, she said. Will looked at her then. Really looked. As if seeing her for the first time. Why did you come here? I thought I was following a man who wanted a wife. And now, she turned to him. Now I'm standing beside a man who didn't ask for help, but who needed it anyway. Will's mouth tightened. You don't owe me anything. She shook her head. You're right. But maybe I owe something to myself. He looked down at his hands. Dirt still under his nails. Blisters on his palms from cutting through burning wood. I never wanted anyone else to carry my burdens. You don't have to want it, she said softly. You just have to stop pushing it away when it comes. They sat in silence after that. The fire in the field still smoldered, a dull red wound on the land. But something else glowed there too. Quiet, uncertain, not yet ready to be named. The fire had cooled, but the air still smelled of smoke. That night, Julia sat on the porch, watching the stars blur behind clouds. Will stood nearby, arms folded, eyes on the ruins of the barn. They're trying to break us, he said. They won't, Julia replied. Hoofbeats interrupted the silence. A rider approached slowly, cautious but unafraid. Will reached for his rifle. It's all right, said the man as he dismounted. Name's Clay. I used to deliver mail out here. Will didn't lower the weapon. Julia stepped forward. What do you want? Clay pulled a folded paper from his coat. I've been tracking letters. Fake ones. Sent to women like you. Always different names, but the same hand. Same town. Ash Creek. Julia's breath caught. You're not the only one, miss, Clay continued. There've been others. One ran. One nearly died. You're the first to stay. Will finally lowered the gun. They did this for sport? Julia asked, her voice sharp. Clay nodded. To humiliate. You staying, surviving, it's got folks talking. I wanted you to know. He handed her the letter. Whoever did this wanted you to vanish. Instead, you've made them nervous. Julia's fingers tightened around the paper. Good. Clay tipped his hat and rode off. Will turned to her. Why didn't you run? She looked at the scorched earth, the house behind them, the boy sleeping inside. Because running never fixed anything. Will was quiet. Then, softly, You still waiting on someone to ask you to stay? She met his eyes. No. The morning sun broke gently across the hills, painting the fields gold where ash no longer clung. Birds returned to their chorus. The smoke was gone, but the scent of it still lingered faintly in the boards of the porch where Julia stood. She held a cup of coffee, watching the yard wake to the sound of chickens and wind. Sammy was already outside, chasing the dog in circles near the new fence posts Will had begun setting the day before. Behind her, the door creaked open. Will stepped out, barefoot, holding something small wrapped in cloth. He stood beside her, silent for a moment, then unwrapped it. A coin, copper, worn but whole, a leather cord threaded through its center. He held it out. "It's not gold," he said, "but it's mine, and I want it to be ours." Julia stared at it. It wasn't fine. It wasn't polished. But it was offered without condition, without fear. She reached for it slowly, letting her fingers close over his. When she looked up, his eyes held something quiet, something settled. "Sammy called you Mama this morning," Will said. Julia smiled faintly. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. They stood in silence, the morning wind brushing past them. In the distance, the burned barn was no longer a wound. It was part of the land now, softened by light, ready to be rebuilt. Ash Creek's whispers had not fully stopped, but some had shifted. "She's still here," someone had said at the market. "Maybe she's made of stronger stuff." "Maybe they're not just surviving," said another. "Maybe they're building something." Later that day, Julia stitched new curtains for the front room. Simple cotton with a faded rose print. Will cleared space in the shed for a second rocking chair. Sammy drew a picture of the three of them, stick figures with big smiles and a dog bigger than the house. He hung it by the hearth. In the quiet, in the slow hours between chores and meals, something like peace began to grow. Not loud, not fast, but rooted. That evening, as the sky turned soft with dusk, Julia stood in the doorway. She looked out across the land. The burned barn, the patched fences, the boy laughing in the yard. She wasn't the girl on the train platform anymore. She wasn't the seamstress from St. Louis, waiting for a man who never came. She was Julia Carson now, and she had walked through fire to earn that name. "Bye-bye,"